Hello, everyone. This is Jason Rodriguez with Zpryme. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Kevin Walker. He is a president and CEO of Duquesne Light. Kevin, welcome, and how are you doing today?
Thanks, Jason. I'm doing well. I appreciate it. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, you as well. And again, so excited to have you on. We've been reading about some of the early things you got going on there at Duquesne Light, and really excited to kind of share with our audience some of those things and some of your thoughts on where the industry may go. But first, for those who are familiar, we usually like to let our audience get to know our guests a little bit more. So first, we're going to get started with a speed round of questions. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, let's have it.
All right, all right. So what's the most recent sci-fi movie you watched?
Oh, sci-fi movie. Yeah, with twin 7-year-olds, I'm watching much more of the Pixar kind of the Disney movies these days. But if I have to go back to my most recent one, it was Matt Damon in The Martian, which was a really cool movie. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but
Yeah, yeah.
he was a astronaut that was stranded on Mars, and it was just really intense. But I thought it was a really good movie.
Yeah. I recall really good stuff, and especially with all the space adventures going on at this
Yeah.
time too. Very, very relevant. So you could definitely, your CEO leading a great utility there. But what advice would you give to a 22-year-old Kevin?
Mm. So 22-year-old Kevin needed to hear from now a 58-year-old Kevin that sometimes a superpower, I call them, or strength that you have, if it's overplayed, it can turn into a weakness possibly. Think about somebody who's super humble, and this was not me as a 22-year-old Kevin, but somebody else who was super humble. Sometimes it's hard for people to understand the impact that you're making because you're so humble. You don't ever have a chance to tout your own horn. Or somebody who's super disciplined, which was a 22-year-old Kevin coming from West Point and in the military. Sometimes that sounds like and looks like rigidity. So that superpower becomes a weakness. So that would be the advice, is just to make sure that everything is in balance and moderation and you don't go too far into areas that they turn into weaknesses.
Oh, yeah, super fantastic, especially in today's conversation. Obviously, it's great to see that the industries and corporations are recognizing that, taking care of ourselves and just bringing mental health into that corporate conversation. So, fantastic advice there. So, what is one of your favorite quotes and why?
Yeah. So, a lot of my quotes go back to civil rights movement and Martin Luther King. So this is one of my favorites from him. And it says, in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And that has really stuck with me. One, because it's timeless. I mean, I kind of go back to that in over my life, but certainly in the time of civil unrest that we're having, political strife, all the other things, people who are downtrodden and lesser than need allies, and oftentimes those allies go quiet, and they're outraged and they don't like what they see, but they haven't mustered the courage or the desire to step out and speak up and to take action. So I think that's powerful, every day, but it's been powerful in the days that we find ourselves in, and that's one of my favorite quotes.
Oh, absolutely love it, and highly relevant. And there's a lot of folks that need to hear, and sometimes me being one, we need to also be reminded of that. So thank you so much for sharing that bit there. So now turning to the Olympics here, it's going on, kicked off last week, and what is one of the favorite sporting events of the Olympics that you like to watch, or maybe a favorite Olympic moment that comes to mind?
Yeah. Well, I love all the sports. I mean, it's just amazing, those athletes, and how they just continue to keep pushing themselves and being better. I love the camaraderie of the nations, kind of like we're all can be joined in friendly competition, but this kind of excellence on stage across the world, which is pretty awesome. I like I guess maybe because I watched it over the last few nights, swimming and certainly gymnastics. The high point in this Olympics for me, which may sound surprising, is, and you mentioned mental health, that the courage that some of the athletes have had to step out and say, I'm going to make myself and my mental health a priority, and I'm not going to compete, or I'm not going to You think about Osaka before, and in a tennis tournament where she said, "I'm not going to, do all these press things because they become stressful, become mental anxiety," and eventually she pulled out, and she had all kinds of support. Certain people throwing stones, but those are people that throw stones at everything, and so you got to discount them. But the bravery, the power, the statement. I mean, even the uniforms, and I guess it was the German teams that decided they weren't going to wear the traditional, lots of skin out uniforms, but they were going to do something that was much more about focused on their athleticism and their skill, and not about the way they look. So I mean, those statements that are real powerful and that only they can make on this international stage has been very memorable for me.
Wow, yeah, yeah, yeah. Just the power that gives to the voiceless to see those acts coming from, in a lot of ways, they're looked at, for better or worse, as superheroes themselves
Mm-hmm.
by their countries and fans. And but to have that mindfulness to say, you know what, if they can do it, then we can all look inside ourselves. And it almost relates back to your first, we were talking about giving that advice to your younger self, where for a lot of folks, and I'd probably say I'm like in the middle of that, where I was fortunate enough to see that you should be taking care of yourself and you do not need to press as hard. But for their generations, like my fathers and so on,
Yeah.
they never had or never saw that attribute kind of being lived out and played out. So what Simone did and what the Olympic athletes are doing is, I think that impact will go far beyond sports. And thank you so much for
Yeah.
pointing that out.
Absolutely.
So yeah, now we're gonna dig into some of the stuff happening in our industry, which just by chance happens to be one of the most exciting times, in my opinion, to be in the energy industry, given the transformation, and you've led a lot of those transformations across your career. But one point, when it comes to the customer, seems to be at an all-time high in terms of interest and how utilities are engaging them. So what are some of those emerging customer trends or needs that you see that will transform the utility industry?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, we have had the luxury as an industry to kind of think about our customer, but not have them as a center of what we do. That luxury is quickly going away. You think about the times, and some utilities unfortunately still refer to their customers as ratepayers or even meters, right? So it's not even a human; it's an inanimate object, and it's a piece of equipment that's connected to other pieces of equipment. We're evolving quickly, partly because we recognize it as a utility industry, but partly because our customers are demanding it. That they're moving up the chain to being customers, consumers, and eventually prosumers. And that's coming from trying to hold us to a standard that's the same as they're getting from other suppliers, right? I mean, if the pizza folks can tell you when the pepperonis go on and how it's moving through the conveyor belt and when it got to the box and how warm it is and when it's going to show up in front of your house, then customers are starting to say, like, well, why can't my utility company approximate that? Now, they're not asking us to give them all that detail, but we don't know that you're out, and you have to tell us when you're out of power. Like, we can't tell you when we're going to show up to your premises to fix your power. I mean, those kinds of things, they're getting less and less patient with, and rightfully so. So as we recognize that, we have to show up in different ways, along with, we talked about climate change, along with their interest of having clean, affordable, reliable, resilient power, having the ability to self-generate, to use the grid in different ways, to use technology, to have different commercial terms and different rates and different incentives, from EVs to time of use rates. All those things are basically being brought to the utility through our customers, through our regulators, through our elected officials, and we have to show up in a way that's supportive of all those things.
Yeah, which leads to this next question, in terms of customers wanting more and looking into these new energy technologies, but also the question which has also bubbled to the surface is equitable access, and how do we make sure that we're not leaving folks behind? And there's the constant conversation of trying to balance investments in renewables, whether it's EV infrastructure, solar, and how that can maybe those costs can somehow be be passed along to some of those consumers who can't be on board. So how can the utility industry do a better job of really creating those equitable access to some of these new technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my career. I've worked in New York, I've worked in California, I've worked in Ohio. I'm here in Pittsburgh, and it really is 50 different regulatory environments with 50 different sensitivities in our country. But the direction is to make sure, to your point, that everybody has full and equitable access to this clean energy future that we're describing. And there's several ways to do that. Obviously, in the utility business, we are in the business of cost sharing and across our portfolio. And certainly when we do a new construct of a substation, we don't ask the people who are connected to that substation to pay for it all like right away. It gets spread across our customer base, and we see that as a public service and a public policy benefit. And so I would imagine that equitability of using these new technologies would be spread the same way, right? So in fact, when I was in California, there were rules that had a guaranteed discount for customers who were disadvantaged, living at or below the poverty level, so they could get access to the clean energy future that we talked about. I think that if you think about customer segmentation, there's customers that don't own their own roofs, right? That don't have their own car, and so they use public transportation. They live in multi-tenant dwellings, and so coming up for solutions for that segment of customers starts to broaden the access and starts to get them opportunity. And then at the end of the day, it's economic development. Again, some of those same customers could benefit from a livelihood standpoint by being a part of that development, construction, servicing, all of the kind of cottage industries that grow out of this clean energy future. They can access it that way too. So I think that focusing on all those components is how we do it.
Got it. So yeah. One of the things we really want to also get across is, given that your experience from New York, California, now back to Pittsburgh, and you've seen the different degrees of the weather and how it impacts communities. So just wanted to see if you could share what are some of those similar challenges between maybe California and Pittsburgh, and then what are those main differences? I would love some feedback there.
Yeah, I mean, again, I start with this commonality that the weather is changing. I mean, more severe weather events are happening across the board. I know you're in Texas, so we talked a little bit about your experience recently with extreme cold weather. I mean, that's not normal for Texas. I think you're used to extreme hot, but extreme cold for the period of time that it happened was not something that you were prepared for. When I was in New York, we had Hurricane Sandy, which was supposed to be a once in 100-year event, and it was rolling right behind other events that were very similar. So those times, flooding, for instance, we've seen across the country. Here in Pittsburgh, we've had significant weather events that have happened, from rain, wind, flooding. So our systems are being taxed, from a utility infrastructure standpoint, being taxed in ways and with a frequency and a severity that we just haven't seen, probably in our lifetimes this regularly. So what that means is we have to build resiliency, right? We have to build resiliency. We have to partner with our customers to make sure they're resilient. They have their own personal resiliency plan. Having lived in California and having to worry about earthquakes, I had an earthquake kit that I never had before. That was my own personal resiliency, where I had water and Band-Aids and flashlights and all the other kind of stuff. That was my personal resiliency plan. And then the utility itself had a resiliency plan with wildfires there. So I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities in that things are becoming more extreme, more severe, more often, and we have to have personal resiliency plan, our customers, and we have to be more resilient as utilities, which means smart investment in things that can protect the system. So it's very similar. I don't know if there's too many differences. I mean, the flavor might be different. So storms versus fires, but the response needs to be the same.
Wow. So a quick follow-up there. So would you characterize, maybe compared to 5 years ago, now leading the utility now, would you say, like, some of this increase in frequency of severe weather events, does that change your strategic approach to how you go out there and transform the utility, and also maybe some of the different types of talent you want to bring into your organization as well?
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. I mean, I just had a conversation today with my board, and if we take a snapshot of the last 10 years from a resiliency standpoint, you get a very different answer than if you take a snapshot from the last 3 years, right? So, because 10 years, it kind of moderates it and makes it seem like, well, that's not that big a deal. But if you look at the last 3 years, it's pretty intense. So even the data analytics that you're looking at has to be sculpted to make sure you get really meaningful data so that you can act on it. But we just have to build more resiliency into our system, given what we know today, than just 5 or 10 years ago, where we felt like the system was resilient enough, right, in a lot of ways. So I have to go back to my experience in California because it was so extreme. Wildfires, which is being suffered today. Wildfires have always been in California. I mean, there's been a wildfire season in the past. In the last few years, there's not been a season. It's been wildfires almost around the year. So that season has extended to where, just dry brush, lightning and opportunities to spark fires, all those kinds of things have caused this, what used to be an isolated period of time that you could, rely on, now is much broader and almost year round. So it's happening. We have to be responsive to it. And I think the utility, the good thing is that, through EEI and other utility groups that we work together as utilities across the country, we recognize it, we're up to the task, and we're moving forward to fix those things.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Now, kind of getting to our last, like, two key questions here. You mentioned kind of being influenced by that civil rights movement, and how that's a core part of what you do. You led by example in terms of building inclusive leadership in companies and cultures there. So, what advice do you have for companies struggling that really don't know where to start?
Yeah. Well, in this case, I'm giving myself advice, because while we've started, I think we have really gotten a good start. We're certainly not where we need to be, and the recognition of that is kind of the first step, right? Recognizing that you need help and there's more that you can do. We just put out our first ever diversity, equity, inclusion report. I'm really proud of what we've accomplished so far. We've done things like stood up, business employee resource groups focused on African American experience in our company, focused on women and focused on veterans, which I happen to be one of. We've amped up our supplier diversity programs to focus on making sure that we have one representation from our kind of our population, our customer base, but that we're actually putting dollars into the pocket of diverse businesses, which have an amplifying effect that to change the game for diversity in our community. We're showing up and partnering with people in our community and businesses and nonprofits that are really making a difference, in education and healthcare and changing food deserts and all those things that plague the populations that we're talking about. We're partnering with media outlets that really target and approach these communities that have been hard to reach. And the last thing I'll say is that, it's through hiring practices, attracting, retaining, developing the best talent in all aspects of ethnicity and gender and all of those pieces is important for us to be successful. And it's not just the right thing to do, I always say, but it is a force multiplier, and it goes to the bottom line of the company. If everybody in the company, every single person in the company, can feel that they can be 100% themselves, can bring their best self to work, and can operate at 100%, like, that's a game changer, right? Versus if 50% of the people feel that way and 50% feel like they only can bring 30% of themselves to the table. So we are really striving hard to do that. My heart's in it, my head's in it. I have a lot of support through my team. And again, it's a journey. It's not we're not there yet. But I think we've made some really meaningful strides in a very short period of time.
Yeah, it sounds like Sounds like it, and thank you for sharing that. So my last question here is really about the communities and the relationship communities utilities have with their communities.
Mhm.
Um, how do you see this role changing, if at all, over the next 5 to 10 years?
I don't see it changing. I mean, we are instrumental to the success of our communities, and they're instrumental to the success of us. They're our neighbors, they're our customers, they're our friends, they're our loved ones. There are sports fanatics that we're actually at the ballparks and football fields with. Like we are integrated with them, and as power as the lifeblood of them being able to do all those things, we are connected. At the hip, as they say. I think because of COVID, our first and foremost is to make sure everybody's safe, healthy, both physically and mentally, and that they can, recover from the impacts of COVID. And I'm very disappointed to hear of the resurgence of the Delta variant and some of the other things that are going on, because I felt like we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully, we get ahead of that, and we're not able, not going to have any kind of, you know, retrograde to where we were before. But like we have got to work together as a community to move forward and to pick back up kind of where we left off, with this bright future that we have, as a community. And Duquesne Light is squarely a part of that.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for sharing that. It's been a pleasure getting just to pick your brain a little bit and give advice to some of those out there who are looking for ways to say, how do we move forward in this utility transition? And we'll be champions here, continue to applaud all the things you're doing and be watching. And we're always here if you guys need anything. And thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Jason. Thank you. These are great questions, and thanks for listening. And anything we can do to help, let us know.